Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts Ariana and Seth.
This is the Pop Cult Podcast. I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And today we review two new horror releases. Later we'll be talking about the South Korean ghost story horror film epic, kind of, Exhuma. But first we're going to be talking about the latest release from A24, and that is Jean Schoenbrun's I Saw the TV Glow. In this film, a classmate introduces teenage Owen, played by Justice Smith, to a mysterious late-night TV show, a vision of a supernatural world beneath their own. In the pale glow of the television, Owen's view of reality begins to crack. So, before we talk about this movie specifically, we had previously seen Schoenbrun's first feature debut, We're All Going to the World's Fair, and I saw that referred to in another review as a 360-degree look at dysphoria.
Yeah.
Which I thought was an interesting way of analyzing that film. What did you think of Schoenbrun's first film, Ariana?
It wasn't something that I particularly connected to until I watched the recent film.
Mm-hmm.
It made me appreciate it more, especially when not only within like the queer experience that she's offering, but it's like when you lose yourself into this world of imagination that's connected to the internet or is connected to fiction. This sense that you don't want to belong in the reality that you're in because it hurts.
Yeah, I think it's my read of what Schoenbrun has done in her first two films here is she is looking at the negative aspects of escapist media, but also the positive aspects, how it's a double-edged sword, that in some ways they can open up your mind to new possibilities, but they can also kind of lock you into a corner that you can't escape from.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think in general about I Saw the TV Glow?
I honestly feel like it is a masterpiece.
Mm-hmm.
It is one of those few films that dives into nostalgia that didn't make me feel that it was cringeworthy. There is obviously this type, it's a type of love towards that nostalgia, but at the same time, intertwining it with what we would say the trans/queer, experience, while also making those of us that perhaps never had to, come out of the closet or decide to pick what their gender is and to live through that gender. It made it available to you in a way that made sense.
One of the things I think that was informative to me was because having grown up in that time period and being roughly the same age as some of the characters in the film, maybe a little older, I think, in most instances, was how old those characters would be today. So Owen, our main character, played by Justice Smith, was 15 in 1999.
Yeah.
That means he would be 40 years old today.
Yeah.
And that's something that I don't think people of our generation really have taken in, is like, oh, and I don't think it's something that the older generations have taken in the way that you still see media talk about millennials as if they're college students.
Yeah.
That millennials are middle-aged. That's what's going on. Like, that's what's happening. There is a lot of cameos in this film. There's one that we didn't notice when we watched, and I discovered was in there. It's a very brief cameo where there's two men standing outside of Owen's house on the sidewalk at night, and they were played by two actors named Michael Morona and Danny Tamborelli. Do those names mean anything to you?
No.
Well, they should mean something to you. Those are Pete and Pete.
Oh, wow.
So she got them for a single scene in the film. And Pete and Pete, I think, is one of the big aesthetic influences of this film.
Yes.
Not the only one, but that sort of lo-fi 90s surreal suburb kind of thing. And it's a film that is very stylistic, but as opposed to some stylistic movies that they're all styled, this has a lot of substance to it.
Yeah, this is what I feel like Bottoms wish it was at times when it comes to at least like the aesthetics of it. About how, yes, we understand this isn't reality, but we're gonna pull you in enough that you're gonna be like, God damn, you did a good job.
Yeah, I think Schönbrunn, she's mimicking a very specific 90s media style. We've mentioned Pete and Pete. Buffy the Vampire Slayer for the
Yeah.
pink opaque is very obvious. And she does an excellent job of making the show that they watch look and feel. And I've only ever watched a handful of episodes of Buffy. It was not my thing. But what I saw of it and then what I saw here, Schönbrunn nails that look, the feel. They've even done the filter to make it look like analog video
Or like
in a way that doesn't look like post processing like you see in a lot of stuff.
I really enjoyed, at the least like story wise, how you do a comparison when Owen is young, watching what should be considered um the replica of like Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Yeah.
Like when it came to the ice cream man and how scary it felt. And then when he talks about rewatching it as an adult, how all of it, all that fear was
It
gone.
doesn't even seem like the same show. And this is one of the few instances where we'll get to a part and I'm gonna say spoilers
Yeah.
because we're gonna have to talk about some things that are going on with dual narratives that are happening in the film. What now this has been classified as horror, and I'm not sure there's horrific elements. There's a genre in literature called weird fiction, which is where it's not horror and the tropes that you typically expect, where there's a monster that has to be defeated, someone's being killed. It's more a horrific, surreal world that the characters are in. And so it's more mood than it is necessarily horror plot.
Yes.
And I thought this film might also be better described as a surreal dark fantasy because I really didn't feel there were horrific things about it, but it didn't read to me in the same way that like Hereditary reads as a horror movie.
Yeah.
And it's the same way I would say like Beau is Afraid is not a horror movie. It's a surreal comedy. And I would say this isn't necessarily a horror movie. It's a dark fantasy, surreal coming of age film.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I feel as if we were to label it exclusively horror, I think it does.
The wrong audience might migrate
Yeah,
towards
it
it.
doesn't do it a service. Mind you, hopefully, like if you are a horror fan and you watch it, you can sense the appreciation of it and take it in fully as it is. It is. I think it's just one of those films that like I I want it to win all the awards if it is possible, but you know at a certain point it won't. I
Well, and
want
that's
it.
because Schönbrunn is ahead of her time, is what's going on here. She's making a movie that the people who hand out the awards now are probably just not going to understand.
Yeah, this is going to be one I like, and if it isn't, I'll be dearly pissed off. Meaning, like when I'm past my middle ages, right into old lady age, I want to be like, this is a film that represents something that like even like we're talking millennials and to a point like Gen Z can touch upon about this need to escape because there's something wrong with the reality that you're living in. And it does it so well, especially when we're starting at the beginning with Owen about how we discover as he tries to have a relationship, like a friendship with Maddie, that he has a bedtime
And
at
he's,
11 years old.
yeah,
And
on a Saturday night. I could see on a school night,
yeah,
but a
and
Saturday
it's
night's very
supposed to
odd.
be at 10:15, so he can never catch the show that he has interest in. And I do love this sense of oppression that you feel like that is coming from the dad without really feeling it. Like without him
He
without the
barely has a
dad,
line of
yeah,
dialogue.
without the dad being involved because he asked his mom, "Hey, can I stay up to watch the show?" No, you know your bedtime. Oh, I do a sleepover, and it's like, okay, you have to ask your dad. Can you ask him for me?
Yeah.
And then it's just like the murmuring of the television, the glow of the television from the background as he avoids even crossing paths with his father. So
Well,
already you feel like this oppressive edge from this man that you barely see.
and his father played by Fred Durst.
Fred Durst. Who
Who
would
is-
have thought?
Because I mean, I know he made that horrible film with John Travolta about the fan, and I think it was I can never remember his name, but he was in the first Final Destination.
You almost want to be like, dude, you made the music of the Bullies. That would have been like
But
taunting
once
Owen in
again,
this
I
film.
think he may have made the music that the Bullies liked, but I think we found that when it comes to art, idiots end up loving good art but don't understand why it's good, and they miss the whole point of it. Think of what's his face? The Eddie Munster motherfucker that used to be in Congress, Paul Ryan, and his
Yeah.
love of Rage Against the Machine, which never made any sense. It was just, oh, you like loud music.
But it's also like, again, I don't really know like much personally about like Fred Durst.
I think if Fred Durst is in this movie, Fred Durst is cool in my book because there's no way he would have been in this movie and not understood what this movie is.
Yeah, because I think in the past he's dressed up on like he's dressed up as an old man during concerts because he's like underlining to his like
Yes.
people's like, I am old. I should not be looking cool anymore. I don't know about his politics anymore.
He's 53. He was on the stupid Bill Maher podcast, but Bill Burr was on that podcast and like fed Maher his own ass. But yeah, I think Fred Durst is probably a liberal guy, which makes him okay. He's probably a cool guy. We also get an appearance from Connor O'Malley, and it totally makes sense to me. And if you followed Connor O'Malley's, especially his YouTube work, I totally get why he and Jane Schoenbrunn are like clicked because they're both Connor O'Malley's recent The Mask that he did about where he plays a character using TikTok, YouTube, all these various social media outlets to tell the story of this young man who is so desperate to become famous, but so ill prepared and poorly educated that he falls into the rabbit hole of conspiracy theory, but it's done in a very funny and heartbreaking way.
Yes, heartbreaking is such a great way to do it, especially because they show his relationship with his dad and his brother isn't good. They don't want him to go. But the person who gave them the money is his grandmother who thought he was the funniest boy in the world.
And then she dies.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say if anyone liked I Saw the TV Glow, I would recommend checking out Connor O'Malley's YouTube channel. He's kind of telling the story of the cis white boy from the same period.
Yeah.
And how damaged he is emotionally and intellectually, and who's just grasping at fantasy to try to make sense of his world in the same way that our trans character Owen is grasping at fantasy to try to make sense of his world. So yeah, interesting cameos. There's Phoebe Bridgers shows up at one point to sing.
Yeah.
But yeah, very interesting film, and she cast it well for these roles, both people that fit the time period as reference points. We also had Amber Benson from Buffy shows up in one scene.
So good. It's a great scene too.
Yeah.
I feel like she's one of those actresses that I'm always like, I think she now writes fantasy novels.
I mean,
I think it's like a modern like magic
like urban fantasy. Okay. So the film is basically carried by two performances here. And I would say it's the first time I've seen these two people in major lead performances. Justice Smith, the last time I'd seen him in something was Detective Pikachu.
Oh, I'm sorry. Magical School for like.
Oh, he was in that. Oh, the Society of Magical Negroes. Wow. That movie was so flushed out of my memory after I saw it. Yeah, what a waste of his talent in that movie, especially when you see this. And you have I think he was in one of the Jurassic World movies. I stopped watching it after Jurassic World. I had no interest in any of that.
The D&D movie.
Oh yeah, he's been so unimpressive to me in all these things that I forget he's in them.
Well, like the thing is, like, I think he is openly bisexual or gay. The person that plays Maddie is
Bridget Lundy Payne.
Non-binary. So,
but I remember seeing them. The only time I've ever seen them in anything that I can recall was as Ted's kid in the Bill and Ted movie, and there really wasn't much there for them to do. They were just kind of there.
Yeah.
So this is the first time I really saw Justice Smith in a commanding lead performance. And then Bridget Lundy Payne, I would say it's a supporting role. It's not a central role, but it's very good. What did you think of Lindy Payne's performance as Maddie because she plays this character, or they play this character as a 13 or 14-year-old girl all the way up to like young, early 20s.
Yeah.
What did you think of their performance?
I thought they did a great performance. I think I really loved the play that they had with their voices. This kind of like dull, not really impressed by anything, fuck the world kind of thing. The teenage performances, especially when they're a little bit older, were so good because I just remember the way like teenagers talk and that like, oh, whatever they're complaining about at the moment feels like the end of the world, but it's obviously not. And then the way that it's also just like they kind of like let go of certain things afterwards when like Owen is like, "Hey, do you want to watch the like the show together?" How the thing that really angered Maddie suddenly is like, "Wait, you know I like girls, right?" Like the way that like it just sort of drops off because and it's also like this interesting thing that Maddie doesn't care about a lot of things except the pink opaque.
Yeah, and it's by seeing the Maddie character grow through these things that Schoenbrunn did a really good job in the writing, and Lundy Payne did a good job in the performance of showing that arc of growth for Maddie in chunks. Because that's one thing we haven't mentioned is that the film is very nonlinear. Like the opening 10 minutes of the movie, we jump around to a lot of different points in time. Eventually, the film kind of settles into a more linear development, but it's clear that the director wants us to understand where we're going to start and where we're going to end up.
Yeah.
Without fully knowing how we're going to get there or what the truth behind Owen is going to be. And so I felt like Lundy Payne as like 14-year-old Maddie felt very like the hair was a really good choice.
Yeah, so great.
Trying to cover her face as much, her clothing all black. So it's that sort of proto-gothy kind of moody young teenager who doesn't necessarily know how to express the angst that they're feeling. And so they do it in very kind of obvious cliched ways. Then we have 17-year-old Maddie, and we can see a style developing a little more. There's two-tone hair dye, wearing like spaghetti strap tops, I think, at a certain point, becoming more comfortable with her body as Maddie.
Yeah.
And then when we see what's interesting, when we see Maddie around 23, I think is the age when she reappears, adopting a more masculine look traditionally.
Like androgynous.
Androgynous or shorter hair, wearing clothes you might associate with like a young man.
Yeah.
And so it's just that those choices that were done through wardrobe also tell a story without us even needing to hear like a line of dialogue. You can see the character evolution through that. Which is interesting because Owen doesn't have that kind of a change, and that's kind of the point of the movie, right?
Yeah.
Owen doesn't look, other than there's a younger actor, Ian Foreman, who plays young Owen, who I thought did a wonderful job.
Yeah, did a great job.
But the way Owen looks from like age 15 to late 30s by the time the movie ends, not much different other than like a thinning hairline, and he becomes more sickly as he goes on. And so it's those counterpoints of someone who is evolving and changing and coming into themselves versus someone who is stuck. And that's a lot of what this movie is about being stuck in a place and a time. And you need to become unstuck because you're not living if you're stuck. And so I think that's also something that's communicated very differently than with Maddie, but in the same as they had to keep a consistency with Owen throughout.
Yeah.
Do we want to get into spoilers now?
Yeah, let's get into spoilers.
So stop listening now if you don't want to be spoiled. So what is your read of what's going on in this movie? Because there are multiple ways to read it.
Yeah.
And I think Schönbrunn has constructed a film that can be read in multiple ways, and every reading works.
Yes. My reading of it is Owen becomes obsessed with this show and obsessed also with the fact that Maddie leaves without a trace, quote unquote.
He turns it into the kind of mystery you might see on the show.
Yeah, only for Maddie to reappear to ask Owen to leave with them. And Owen doesn't leave the first time and doesn't leave the second time. And it is this fear of Owen to reckon with what Maddie is asking him to reckon with okay, we're talking about the show, but what about the time we spent together?
And he's blocked out a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Because we get flashes of memories that are scenes we didn't see.
Yeah, which is Owen wearing one of Maddie's dresses, walking down the football field and them talking together. There is this friendship in where it is a pure friendship. There's not like there's no sexual favors amongst them. There's not this need for one of them. In fact, Maddie is the one that gives the most to Owen by recording VHS tapes of the show so he can follow it, despite the fact that his father makes fun of him for wanting to watch the show, refuses to bend down when it came to like his bedtime.
Well, it's like I wouldn't even say he makes fun of him. There's a brief mention of, isn't that a show for girls? There's such a distance between Owen and his father.
Yeah.
That like that distance is like I don't know if his dad was abusive or just cold, like that kind of emotionally
It's
abusive.
like that
Yeah.
the coldness that you always hear amongst your other friends when they understood that their parents knew that there was something different amongst them before they could even
Like keeping his
detail it.
distance kind of thing from his
Yeah.
own son.
It's almost like that feeling that we get about how like I forgot that one film that we watched that the guy was like visiting his parents as ghosts and he was like, would he have bullied me as a child if we were
All of us strangers.
and like the dad was like, yeah, I
which would make a very interesting companion piece
Yeah.
to this. Yeah.
And it's just really good and I don't want to just be like, oh, it's so good. It's just like
Well, I want to get into my read of
Okay.
the movie. I think the entire movie is from Owen's perspective.
Yeah.
And once you realize that, the movie makes a lot of sense. Owen is emotionally stunted because he didn't grow up in an environment that supported him fully. It's clear his mother loves him. His dad's very distant from him, but his mother dies when he's a teenager. And so he never really is nurtured in any way. So he's desperate to seek out a connection with someone. And he comes across this person, Maddie, who he sees that there's something about us that's similar and that we both feel like outside of this place that we're stuck in.
Yeah.
And the thing that connects them, because they're awkward and they don't know how to talk about how they feel, is this TV show. When we see him watching the show, that's not actually the show. He's a child who is taking ideas of the world and things he thinks, and he is projecting them onto this show.
It's like parasocial relationships of sorts.
And that's proven because later as an adult, he decides to rewatch it on a streaming service, and it's tonally and visually totally different than everything he remembers. And that's because the show in his head is not the show that it actually was. And we know this because when we look at the two leads in the Pink Opaque, Isabel, and then I forget the name of the other character in the show. I just can't remember her name.
Let me see if I can recognize it.
There's a lot of cast members here that don't have names attached to their character. Amanda, was that what it was? Maybe.
Yeah.
So the leads of the Pink Opaque are a white girl who dresses very butch.
Yeah.
And a mixed race young woman. And we have Owen is a mixed race young man who hangs out with Maddie, who is a girl that dresses very butch or like very
eventually
dresses very butch. So he is not seeing what's in the show. He is projecting his friendship with Maddie onto the show.
Yeah.
she mentions something about there being a bar in the show where musicians perform, and I think that's a reference to Twin Peaks: The Return a little bit.
Well,
But
also
and then
Buffy does that. There was
oh,
other
I didn't know
shows.
that was
Yeah.
thinking Buffy. Okay, because I'm never gonna watch Buffy, so I'm never gonna. But then the only time we see that bar is in the real world when Maddie comes back and tells Owen she knows a place that's far away that they could go to. It's a gay bar outside of town. That's
Yeah.
where they go. And that's why Maddie knows about it, is because Maddie came out of the closet when she finally decided to leave. That's why she cries the last night that Owen's at her house, is because she realizes I can't stay here anymore. I just have to go. Like, I just have to go. Uh, and so once you realize that the entire film is seen through Owen's point of view, that's where we're able to have two different readings of the film. When Maddie is talking to him about what's going on, he is remembering what she said intentionally wrong. He's mixing it up with the events of the show because he doesn't want to confront what Maddie actually tells him is you're trans.
Yeah.
And so he can't deal with that, right? And so it turns it into this thing where no, we're actually part of the pink opaque. And I'm Isabel, which the crazy thing is, yeah, you are Isabel, you're trans. Like, but he won't, he's like, no, I'm the character in the show, and I'm buried alive because Mr. Melancholy poisoned me, who Mr. Melancholy seems to look a lot like his dad,
Yeah.
right? And he thinks that he just has to wake up somehow in the TV world and then he can escape this world. But we know that's wrong because when he goes to watch it on the streaming service, that's not the show in his head. And so what the movie is telling us is he's buried himself inside these fantasies as a way to cope with the internal turmoil inside of him that he is terrified to face.
Yeah.
Because to face it would mean, because remember he even mentions like, oh, and I have a family now. We never see that family.
Yeah. He says, I have a family now to the camera, but it's the most deadpan thing. Is like, and I love them very much and would do anything for them.
Well, and you think about the way there's multiple times in the movie that he turns and faces the camera.
Yeah.
The way the film looks and the way the film is shot, this isn't like, it's the surreality of it is what's going on in his head. It's
Yeah.
both a stylistic choice by the director, but also something that is crucial to understanding the movie.
Yeah.
And so the end of the movie is, I think it's an ending that people are going to be confused about how they're supposed to feel about it. What did you think you were supposed to feel about the end of the movie when it finally reached there? Because I don't think it ended on the note I thought it was going to end on.
I interpreted it like it was almost like a glee that he discovered something, but he was also apologizing for it. So that was the confusing part. Because he was like, new medication, new medication. But it was knowing that it was still in him.
Yeah, I think the importance of that ending is that Owen realizes who he is, but he's still not quite there yet. He's still living in the fantasy. And so I think that's important that Schönbrunn ends it that way because she doesn't want to sell a false bill of goods to the audience, especially if there's young trans people who are still closeted. She wants them to go, I don't know. I don't know when you're going to be comfortable enough to come out.
Yeah.
But you can always do it. And so I didn't get a sense of like negativity at the end of the film.
Not like this. It's not like this display that we had in the early 2000s where everybody was like, "It gets better."
Yeah, Schönbrunn is not selling that it gets better line, but she's also not being bleak and hopeless about it.
But I think it's also this very much about being when Maddie does return into Owen's life. It's like we can live those lives of the pink opaque, but it's also us having to understand that the pink opaque of the show that he loved was them cosplaying as these characters essentially. And what it was is like it is also in a way you can view it as a his first love story that he can't acknowledge that it's the first love story. Because there's this whole thing when he's like when Maddie's really upset about a friend of hers who she's like, oh, she's telling everybody that I try to touch her boobs. That's not true. Blah, blah, blah. like, and now she wants to be a cheerleader, which was to me was a great scene because it was like that teenage upsetness.
The way people grow apart.
Yeah, and that rage that she delivered so well, like that they delivered so well, that when Owen was like, "Do you want to watch the Pico Pake together?" and Maddie goes, "You know I like girls, right?" And Owen is like, "Yeah, I know that's not what this is." And I think what it was is over time was Maddie could have been in a relationship with Owen had Owen transition and become their true self.
But I love that the film can be read in both literal ways as to what the characters say,
Yeah.
but just as equally in this metaphorical way, and they both track. There's enough there to support both of them.
And I think it's also just it's a film that if you are not a part of the queer community and you watch it like with an open mind and an open heart, you sort of have this ache about it because there is no right time to come out and there's no right time to transition. It is knowing that you have to essentially give up something that is terrifying. And Owen doesn't want to leave with Maddie at the beginning.
Well, he never wants to leave
He
with
does,
Maddie. He can't find,
right.
yeah.
Because at the first time, like he does it because it's like he loves his mom and he's scared and he doesn't want to leave the people that love him, only for his mom to die a
So
year later.
the big question would be, why doesn't he leave the second time? And I think that's some ambiguity in the movies. You have to really think about why would he not leave? Because I think he'd have to give up the fantasy pink opaque in his head.
Yeah.
And I think that's become this.
Well, especially when you think about the way that you explain the film, it is two friends that have a connection who are beating monsters telepathically from afar. So
Yeah.
to him, Maddie and him are fighting their demons from afar.
Yeah.
But the thing is that what he hasn't realized is Maddie's no longer fighting her demons.
He's
Because
conquered them.
Maddie has determined that they have understood who they are.
Yeah.
And like he's left fighting the demons,
Mhm.
but with what weapons?
Yeah. One thing I do wonder is if younger people who didn't grow up in the 1990s will feel the same about this movie. I think young people are really into like film and cinema and things like that. They're gonna like it. I think there'll be many things because it is a very nostalgic film, but nostalgic in the best ways something can be nostalgic, in that it doesn't fawn over the past. It simply it explains why we cling to things from our childhood.
Well, I think it does so well explaining the difference of watching something as when you were young and easily like impacted by things versus watching it when you're an adult. Um, which I think that still reflects to kids these days. Like even if we have a streaming era, I think it's just now we have the ability to go back to it versus talking it amongst your friends and only living through that like memory of the conversation of it.
So the film I saw, the TV Glow, has now become like the pink opaque.
Yeah.
It can become a thing that closeted queer or trans kids watch, and they can see themselves in it to some extent, which I think is a very interesting thing. And that was clearly one of Sean Brown's intentions, right? As it becomes this sort of Ouroboros thing that's like eating its own tail, where it becomes the thing that it's about.
Because in that film, it's supposed to be like the interruption of the real world coming in and how upset the character becomes because of that interruption of it being like they can live within their melancholy as long as it's fictional because it means it won't last forever versus even though you grow up and you realize these feelings won't last forever during that time it just feels like that's it.
So stepping back a little bit, A24 has put out several films in 2024. I know they had announced that this was going to be like the year of their big like push into the mainstream more than they had before.
Yeah.
And I think it was something we knew inevitably was going to happen, right? That they were going to expand at some point. So as we look at their output for 2024, it's almost like I think they've had at least a film a month, if not more.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that I think was due to the writer's strike, and they kind of doubled up on things. But looking at 2024, we've had we'll look at movies that were just A24 and put out theatrically, because there's a lot of things that they have that have been put out on like streaming, and I don't really count those. Problemista,
Yeah.
Love Lies Bleeding, which were a week apart from each other.
Oh.
Civil War. I saw the TV Glow, and now Tuesday has just come out, that Julia Louis-Dreyfus film. What do you think of A24 in 2024?
There's some good gems in there. I think it's just no longer going to be the powerhouse for people who really, really love certain type of films.
I think their output is still
It's still,
wildly unique
it's
compared to
still
like
unique.
other
I
studios.
I
know you're talking about Civil War. That's
Yeah,
one you didn't care
but
for.
I think it's also I'm very hesitant on with them being like, we're gonna be the new big thing, because that means you're not cultivating these artists. You're gonna lose some artists in the get-go because you're not willing to put like money into what their ideas are. And so I'm on the fence. What about you?
Um, I'm interested to see where they go, because we still have Ty West's Maxine that completes his X trilogy is coming out. There's other movies that I don't really know much about that are coming out, but I'm open to them. The thing about A24 is I feel like they've always surprised me. It always feels fresh.
Yeah.
Even Civil War, even if I didn't like it, it at least felt like something that was unique. And so I am interested to see where they go. The one thing I don't like about A24 is the amount of merchandising they do, but maybe that's you pay the bills, I guess. But they really merchandise the hell out of their movies. I think they still will like put up new products related to Everything Everywhere All at Once, because that was really the big breakout movie for them.
Yeah.
And which I felt kind of ambivalent about.
I really liked it. I know you felt
I
kind
didn't
of
think it was bad.
no.
It didn't
It wasn't.
capture my heart in the same way that I would say something like I Saw the TV Glow did.
Yeah, I think it's just your relationship with your parents isn't like great.
Yeah, I think
So
any movie where it's about like parents and children reuniting, I'm like, but why would you do that? And in this, it's about a child who's so emotionally distant from their parent. I was like, oh yeah, I can totally relate to this. So do you recommend I Saw the TV Glow to everyone?
I say go for it.
No. I think it is probably one of the most unique film experiences you can have in 2024. And it truly is a work that is both personal to Schönbrunn, but also expresses emotions that I think many have or are currently feeling. So it's something that feels very much of a person, but also something that you can connect to.
Yeah.
The process of excavating an ominous grave unleashes long hidden secrets and dreadful consequences buried underneath. This is a review of Exhuma, I guess is how you pronounce it, a South Korean horror film. So I'm a big fan of South Korean films. I think you are too, from the South Korean films that you've seen.
Yeah.
So I'm always open to watch one. This one had been getting a bit more marketing, I think, in the States than a lot of South Korean films normally do. Wasn't directed by anyone I was familiar with, and I did get the sense it was more of a standard horror movie. This wasn't like a Bong Joon-ho or a Park Chan-wook kind of movie. Though it does star Choi Min-sik, who played the main character in Old Boy, and he is a very important character in this movie. What were your general thoughts about Exhuma?
It had a focus of a style to it, which I wasn't bothered by.
I think the cinematography was not very good.
I'm saying style.
Okay, but I even feel like the production felt a little too slickly commercial for me.
Yeah, I think that was part of the problem.
There was no grit to it.
It felt as if you were giving me this high class commercial version of these people that are dealing with like supernatural stuff. At the beginning there was a lot of like narrative from like the main like woman.
It did feel like it switched who I was supposed to focus on a lot. And I think part of the problem is the movie is 2 hours and 14 minutes long.
It is a long film.
And it needed cuts.
Mhm.
Like somebody said that they felt like they watched a movie and a half.
Yeah.
Because there's like a plot that kind of gets resolved in the first hour.
Kinda hour-ish.
Well, I mean, it's like they deal with what they first dig up from the grave.
Mhm.
Only turns out, oh, there's more. And I think there's a way to do that doesn't feel like you're stretching the story out or that we needed to do this in 2 parts or something. The best way I could describe it is it feels like the Korean version of The Conjuring,
Mm-hmm.
where it's clearly there's an idea here that these characters might continue in another movie, maybe. That's the vibe I kind of got at the end, because despite things that happen to them, none of them die.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking, like, none of them? We're not gonna kill off any of them. Okay? And the fact that they're all alive at the end would lead me to think they're possibly wanting to do this as a series and like, oh, what another case for these investigators. The actors are great.
Yeah.
I think and I even like the characters to an extent. I wonder if you agree with this point. I think that I wish it had made a choice whether to lean into the campiness of the idea or the bleakness of the horror. And it feels like it never wants to do either.
I also had a problem with the fact that like within the family and then the supernatural people, there was never the sense of like one of them is in the wrong about something. Because there's a lot of like when the eldest son who like contracts them.
Well, I think we need to explain a little bit more because that.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So the film opens with Bong Gil and Lee Hwa Rim. Lee is a shaman,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very traditional, like Korean folk beliefs. So it's not really attached to any sort of dogma or anything. This isn't Buddhist, though I think like in the East, it does seem like a lot of different spiritual beliefs kind of crisscross over into each other.
Yeah.
And they have gone to Los Angeles, where a wealthy Korean man who lives in both places his wife has just had a child. And the child was born crying and hasn't stopped crying until they've sedated it.
Yeah.
And they believe this has something to do with a dead relative who was not resting in peace.
Yeah.
And it turns out they're right. The grandfather, and that involves them having to go to a remote burial site where you can see North Korea from the burial site. And I'll talk a little bit more because it does seem like there's a lot of Korean history,
Mm-hmm.
but because we don't necessarily have that background, we might have missed things. I'm sure we have. And they dig it up. Well, they perform a bunch of rituals to make sure that if the spirit is angry, he can't get to them. But of course, things go wrong, and the evil spirit of Granddaddy gets loose,
Yeah.
and they have to deal with it. And that's just the first hour of the movie.
Yeah.
Explaining the second hour and 15 minutes, I'm just like,
colonialism. That's the best.
So yeah, it's definitely about Japanese colonialism. If you want more details, I'm not really sure what was going on.
Yeah, so the first part of the movie, there's a lot of her talking, the shaman character about just
Lee.
being like, oh, first starting to be suspicious and then surprised about what it is that we discover. And so a lot of times the man that contracted them talking to his wife, are you sure about them? Are you sure about them?
Mr. Park is his name, yeah.
When Mr. Park talks to his mom, I don't know about this. Are you sure they're not taking us for all our money? He talks to his aunt who doesn't want like her father's grave dug up. I don't know how I feel about them. And each turn, I think
It's a very ambiguous. Everybody's very ambivalent. They won't say how they feel.
Yeah. And so I thought to myself, because it's supposed to be like he reveals like, oh, his older brother had killed himself in an asylum. How every time he closes his eyes, Mr. Park, all he hears is screaming. And
but I think it was implied that the brother killed himself because he was also haunted by the grandfather.
Exactly. Yeah. And so he's like, now that it's dawned to me and now I'm realizing it's going down my son, I want to do whatever it takes in order to stop this. And so the shaman group is kind of like, this family's hiding something from us.
Well, because then there's a second half to the group that's
Yeah.
back in Korea. And that's Choi Min-sik's character, Kim Sang-duk, and Yong Jun. And I think Yong Jun is a mortician.
Yeah.
But like of the Christian faith. And then Kim is a geomancer, which was a new thing I had never heard of before. And apparently it's like a spiritualist who helps find good burial places that have good energy.
Yeah, and he does a lot of also he does it for like construction sites about where it's supposed to be facing.
And also like cleansing if you have to exhume a body and move it to a new grave, he knows how to perform rituals that like keep the spirit from getting angry.
Yeah.
And so these are the two halves of the operation that then meet back up in Korea where they go about exhuming the body.
Yeah, and so at first you're thinking, okay, the family is speculative about what's going on. Maybe they are the type of people that have taken advantage of them. So Lee, Hiba,
you just call Lee.
Lee, she's like, oh yeah, we're probably gonna get a lot of money from them, but she's like, but they're rich, they can afford it.
And then they gotta sit around and laugh about it too,
and they laugh because
because they are doing this for the money.
Yeah, because Kim is like, well, my daughter is gonna get married soon. I'm gonna need the money for my daughter's wedding.
Well, and I think there was a little Ghostbusters angle there, and I kind of wish they had played with that more of that. Like they're legit, but they don't think this is a big deal, kind of a thing, or maybe they've never dealt with anything this big before.
Yeah,
and it like spirals out of control. But I never got the sense that it was. They were like, oh, we've never encountered anything like this before. They kind of felt like, oh, I think it might be this.
There were, I feel like, very small instances, but they were brushed off pretty easily.
It was more almost like a mystery narrative of trying to like follow the clues and track down things.
And so back to the whole thing with the family.
The parks.
Which kind of annoyed me. Was, okay, so the shaman group is doing their thing. Bad things happen to Mr. Park. And they're like, hey, is there anything that you guys happen to know to explain why this burial ground is as fucked as we think it is? Because like Kim is like, there's something really off about this. This is not where you bury people. There are foxes everywhere. Everybody knows foxes are bad omen.
After they exhumed the coffin, one of the workers who was helping dig it up sees a snake come up and then kills it with his spade, and it has a human face and screams.
And he's like, yeah.
And he's like traumatized the next time we see that guy.
And it's like, but they're like talking to the Park family, and they're just like, no, we got nothing. We know nothing.
Well, they do reveal that the site was picked by a monk named Gizune.
Yeah.
Which I'm like, that's a Japanese name, right? And that's where the narrative.
They'd find out that was like his nickname, and that he was a Japanese person.
And
that maybe like the grandfather worked for him, kind of thing. Like,
well, yeah. There's the implication, I think, is that the Park grandfather was a collaborator with the colonialists.
Yeah.
But and then there becomes this whole thing about an anima, which is a spirit that intertwines itself with a physical object.
Had to do with the helmet. It fell all over the place because it just was like, would not the Park family know that their grandfather, because it's not great grandfather. It's like,
well, no, it's. I mean, yeah,
it's like only like they would know about this and would want to be like, hey, we want to hide this because we have a ton of money out there. Or at
least the aunt, because she would have been the deceased's daughter.
Yeah,
I think it would have, and then there was also her brother is still alive up to a point in the movie, but is like an invalid. And I think it would have been more interesting if there had been like weird bits of information that they didn't want to talk about, or they ran away from certain conversations because they didn't want to face the fact that their father collaborated with the Japanese.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the movie never really goes for that. I won't say, oh, this movie needed to spoon feed me things, because it's a Korean horror film, and I think it was made for a Korean audience. It was not made for me. I appreciated seeing a horror film, a ghost story that has a totally different spiritual cosmology than what we're used to in the West.
Yeah.
So it's running by different rules, and the structures of things are different, and the rituals they perform. It was just a lot of movie. And especially because that Park family becomes completely insignificant after the first hour or so of the movie.
Yeah, because afterwards it's kind of like, well, after everything that happens, like the aunt's like, I will pay what it is my nephew had promised you. Just cleanse the place.
And then it goes into the whole thing about a samurai helmet that's in the grave. And like I would say the special effects are great. They're
Yeah.
fantastic. Like the monster that we see that emerges is a well-designed monster that is creepy and scary and dangerous.
Yeah.
But the movie, the pacing is also not very good.
Yeah, because there's many instances that you think, oh, this is the end.
Yes,
And then like surprise.
they go back to that grave. They go to the grave 3 times
Yeah,
over the
they
course of the
do.
movie, and every time they go, they dig up something else. And by the third time, I did see someone on Letterboxd who said, by the third time, I was like, Jesus Christ, like, don't leave the grave until you've dug like a mile down or something,
Yeah.
because clearly there's a lot going on in this grave. Um, there were moments that were really good. The staying overnight at the monastery, I think that was a great set piece
Yeah.
where we see that monster finally revealed and it does its thing. The sad thing is there seems to be no consequences for its actions, because anyone who's not one of our 4 main characters, no matter how harmed they are, oh, they're going to be fine. They just need to go to the hospital and recover. Like they had a fist plunged into their side and their liver torn out. They're going to be cool.
I mean, if this was a promotion on how like Korea has amazing healthcare,
Yeah.
you sold me. You sold me.
Uh, did you have any characters, actors from the film that really stood out to you? Like their performances were like, that was pretty good.
I feel like the 4 of them were, I liked them as this idea of like a group together.
They had very good chemistry with each
Yes,
other.
they had amazing chemistry.
And I wouldn't be against watching another movie with these characters as long as it's not over 2 hours long.
Yeah, I think it's like this interest, like I like the fact that when Bong gets hurt, like gets hurt, like Lee's character is immediately like, this is my fault. I should have done better to protect him. Like he had left his family in order to work with me. Like she like
And is that like a protege mentor relationship, or were we supposed to get vibes that like they had feelings for each
I
other?
think that they have feelings for each
Because
other.
the film did they did a, I don't know if it was a good job or a bad job, but it is played as very ambiguous.
Well, they did it very well at sort of like business is business. When they're like
Yeah.
conducting business together, they act like business people.
I really felt Choi Min sick, but I mean that doesn't surprise me because he's
Yeah,
so good in Old
he's
Boy.
so good. And
But
like
it's so different to see him as such an old man.
and like also like him playing against the other guy.
Yeah,
It's
Youngjun.
like it's this amusing thing because the other guy is only like a few years younger, but isn't like someone that you'd be like, oh, this is his protege.
They feel more partners.
Yes, and I did like how like none of like when the coffin got cracked open the first time, when they're like, don't fucking open it, and they're like, the guy was so pissed off because he's like, I paid him enough money to not fucking open it. You think he wouldn't
Are you
do
talking about
it?
the guy in the hospital who does open the coffin?
Yes,
Yeah.
you know, they told him like not to, and
Because there are little bits of humor between them,
yeah,
but I think that's where the film is messy for me, and I don't know if that's like lost in translation cultural thing. It felt like it wanted us to laugh at these 4 characters sometimes, which is where I thought like, oh, kind of be a little campy, right? Like
yeah.
play into the silliness of like, this is insane, the situation we're in. But then it also wanted to take things deathly serious. And everything was like the most serious thing you've ever seen. And you had to be so serious.
I'm not really surprised about that aspect, especially when it comes to
Was
like
that like a Korean
Asian...
kind of thing?
Yeah,
like Korean soap operas and things
yeah,
like that.
because I've seen kind of like, oh, there's be like these funny bits, but immediately we're back to the serious part.
What's like Indian cinema?
Yeah,
Like the more popular Indian cinema where you're just like, yeah, I think this is like a cultural thing that I've been trained on a certain rhythm and pacing. And this is so different from that I'm
well,
like,
we
I
talk
feel
about
off.
like the melodrama of like some Asian films
Yeah.
that we've seen that you've been like, this is too much, and I'm like, this is exactly what they want.
Well, like anime can be very
Yeah.
just so like over the top.
But it was a lot of movie because it's like,
and it wasn't always always interesting.
because then like they introduced 2 other characters that I don't know if they're like family relationships to the Lee's character, because she's like, oh, like pray over Bong and like
it
da da da.
does feel like a case of introducing characters for plot
Yeah.
circumstances Or, oh, we need this character to die, so let's introduce them so then they can die, because we aren't going to kill our four main characters. And I also think not killing off one of the main characters, to me, kind of undercuts the movie a little bit, because then you're like, oh, were they ever really in any danger? Really, if they all made it out of that
It's also
scenario?
like if they don't end up being like, guys, I'm done. This is the last thing I'm gonna do for you guys. In fact, like it's this weird thing where the ending, like he, like Kim it's a family photo and the family's fucking cute.
Well, it's his
Yeah,
his side, and then is it also the groom's side?
probably.
Yeah.
Like I was like, it's a family photo for like the wedding, and he tells them come in because he's like he considers them part of his family.
And that scene kind of made me think, oh, they want to do another one of these.
Like they want to be like, see, he sees them as family, so he's never gonna really stop doing it.
Yeah.
And like it should have been more like, yeah, he quits, but then joking, being like, we'll get him around in the next one.
You
like,
do a Men in Black 2, where, because we recently watched that.
oh god,
it was terrible. And where, the next movie is, Lee shows up at Kim's apartment or whatever he's doing now, and is like, we need you to come back one more time. We've got this thing. And he's like, fine, God damn it, I'll do it. And then depending on what you want to do, he either dies at the end of that movie or he comes out of retirement permanently and is like, we're back in business, guys.
Yeah, I think it's a little weird because I know for a fact that like in like Bong's character is like heavily tattooed, and I know in Korean culture apparently you need to have your tattoos covered all the time.
Well, it's at the end of the movie they paint those like markings on them as a protection against the
because
ghost.
they see it like at some point like he has like his shirt up and they're like, oh, they missed his tattoos.
When the ghost came in through a piece of the side
flesh that didn't
torso that didn't have a tattoo
and
on
so
it.
she's like, that's what. So it's like this stupid thing that all of them have it on their face.
He's
now.
not tattooed. It's not just tattoos. They're literal like protection spells across his
like,
torso and his
like
arms.
Buddhist like prayers across, and they paint them on their faces.
Which it makes me wish there was like a pop-up video version for white people like me, just so I could be like, oh, that's what that is. Because I don't expect the movie to explain it, because once again, it's a movie for a Korean audience. In the same way that like you're not feel like you're gonna watch The Exorcist and then I have to explain like who Jesus is.
But
like, no, I know who that is.
You are going to come as an outsider to them for them to be like, the Japanese like spirit doesn't care about anything. It will rip apart whatever it wants. It's not hungry, it's evil.
I did enjoy the anti-colonialism of the movie. That was a really fun part.
Like, oh shit, imagine if you're like you're a Japanese person and you're like, I just want to watch this film.
When there seemed to be some commentary about the sadness of the split between Korea, I think especially expressed by Kim.
Yeah.
Like he really shows like mournfulness over the fact that there is a North and a South Korea, not a unified Korea. Yeah. It's not like a big part of the movie, but it's like mentioned a little bit in there. Would you recommend Exhuma to a general audience?
No.
I would say if you really love like Blumhouse movies, but even then you're going to be confronted with a lot of specific cultural things that for some people, I think they're going to love it because there's people that love to dive in head first.
Yeah.
I'm that way with some stuff, and you want to be overwhelmed. So then you have stuff to research afterwards. But if you're someone who wants the movie to explain its sort of view of the spirit world, this movie's not doing that for you.
The more reason that I say no, it's just it's long. It's so long.
It's too long.
And it's just like the thing is like I loved going into something that was completely out of the realm. I loved watching like the chants, the singing, the fact that they're like, we need to bring 5 pigs to represent the 5 people that are going to dig up the bearer site, and how like, oh, we need to have like the blood of a white horse.
and this is like a giant like gasoline container. I'm like, where did you get that blood? Like, god damn, you trained that horse.
Sodas that are like have white horses are like, god damn, I gotta lock up my horse. Like there's like all this stuff that was super interesting.
But I think it's the fact that there's so many different narratives in this one movie.
Yeah.
And the fact that the Park family story just becomes so insignificant by the end.
Yeah, I had a huge problem with that.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pop Cult Podcast. Make sure to check our show notes for all the important links, including to our website, popcult.blog. Also, make sure that you're subscribed to be notified when new episodes are up wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. If you visit popcult.blog, you're going to find a lot more reviews of a lot more things. Right now in June, we're doing a flashback to 1989, and coming up this week, I'll be posting my reviews of The Cook, The Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, Pedro Almodovar's Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, and John Woo's stylish action film, The Killer. We'll also be doing a review of The End of Evangelion. If you enjoy what we do here on the podcast and over on popcult.blog, we hope that you try to support us on Patreon. We have different reward levels for you to pick from. We'd like to thank our current patrons, Ida, who donates at the sneak peek level, and Becca and Matt, who donate at the writer's room level. If you donate at the writer's room level or higher, you get to pick a movie every month for me to watch and review. You can even add your own thoughts to that review if you so wish. No matter what level you donate at, you'll be able to get access to our patron exclusive podcasts. And right now over on the Patreon, we do have, it's open to the public, a poll to decide what film series we should do for the latter half of July. Your choices are going to be fantasy worlds on film, contemporary female directors, and French film noir. So make sure you go over there and you vote to help shape what we do at the end of July. On next week's episode of the podcast, we'll be reviewing, or actually next week, we won't be making a podcast. I just remember that. We will not be here. The following week, which will be our last podcast of June, so June 30th, we will be reviewing Rachel Sennett as she takes a dramatic turn in I Used to Be Funny, as well as Hayao Miyazaki's latest, The Boy and the Heron. Until next time, you keep listening, we'll keep watching.